Okay.
Okay. I have 4:59 on my phone. It's now 5.
Hi, City Attorney. You? Go ahead.
Hey, Gene, how are you doing?
Hi, Chris.
Doing well?
I am. I went to Natural Health Center.
Yeah.
And I thanked her. They had a big open house up last Saturday.
Oh, cool.
And her dad, the original guy, he said, oh.
Antonio, am I turning it over to you?
So more is coming from the Natural Health Center.
Sweet.
Well, it is 5 o'clock after all, and it looks like we're all settled and ready to go, plugged in. So I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. It is the Committee of the Whole meeting for the Kalamazoo City Commission for this beautiful Monday, October 7th, 2024. And first order of business, Clerk Borling, please call the roll.
Commissioner Cooney. Commissioner Decker. Present. Commissioner Hoffman.
Present.
Commissioner Pradel.
Present.
Commissioner Wilson.
Present.
Vice Mayor Hess.
Present.
Mayor Anderson.
Here. Thank you, Clerk Borling. First order of business after that, then, is may I have a motion to excuse Commissioner Cooney from this meeting? No. Yes, Vice Mayor counseled me against asking for that. All right. Next, communications, Manager Ritzma.
Nothing, Your Honor.
Thank you, Manager Ritzma. Now is an opportunity for public comments. Anyone who is in the chambers is welcome to make a public comment at the Committee of the Whole. A public comment period is 2 minutes per person. If you want to make a comment, please come forward. State your name, whether you live in the city. Seeing no one, just a reminder, there is an opportunity for public comments at our business meeting that starts at 7. So we are down to the business of the evening. Manager Ritzma.
Thank you, Mayor. For the first topic of our work session is the Economic Development Strategy for 2024. I believe we had a work session on this in July where you were given a draft proposal. Well, this evening is the final product, so I will turn it over to Jared Berdu, our Neighborhood Business and Special Projects Coordinator, who will introduce our guests and give you the presentation.
Welcome, Jared. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having us. We were here in July, presented some of the framework for the strategy. We're here with the final strategy in front of you tonight. Very excited about it. We've been working on it since about December is when we had a kickoff, so excited to wrap it up and start implementing it. It's been through the Economic Development Corporation. They've served as the steering committee and adopted it last month at their meeting, and we're looking forward to approval here. So I'll turn it over to Camoy & Associates for their presentation. Alex and Dan.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be back again. All right, let's get situated. All right, like Jared mentioned, we were back here in July, and we did just want to zoom out before we go right into the strategy and right into the meat of things. Just zoom out and remind ourselves the work that's gone into this, and specifically the work that has gone into this and the iterative process since July. So, we got lots of feedback from this group at that meeting, and so we went back, we worked with the EDC, with staff, with additional stakeholders for conversations to make sure that we were reflecting what we were hearing in that feedback. So over the summer, the strategy really has been refined many times in the version that you would have seen in preview of this meeting. You know, working with the EDC as the steering committee for this process, we were quite happy with their feedback and interaction with this project. And in the final meeting that we did have with them last month, there are already questions about, you know, where do we go from here? What's next? How can we work on, you know, strategies X, Y, and Z? They're ready to go with this strategy. And so between our 70 plus stakeholders that have been involved in this process, you know, we really feel like this reflects a strategy that is built from the values and community of Kalamazoo. Again, just to sort of orient ourselves in terms of what we were trying to do with this strategy, this is a document that reflects the work that the city itself can do, so city leaders, elected officials, staff, certainly a role and roadmap for city itself. It's also for the partners across the entire city and really the region as well. So, you know, when we say the economic development ecosystem, that's referring to partners across education, workforce, philanthropy, all of the different housing, all of the different components that go into economic development. This strategy encompasses all of their work as well. And so the work that staff has already been doing with this plan is working with those leaders to roll out some of the initial steps for the strategy. So all of that to say that this is not solely on the backs of city staff. Of course, they are an important role in driving it forward, but this really is for the ecosystem of the city. I mentioned we had 70 plus stakeholders over 10 months, and we expect that those conversations will continue throughout the 5-year period of this plan as well. All right, diving right into the goals. These are pretty familiar to what you would have seen in July, a few tweaks based on, again, the conversations and feedback that we received. But I really just want to focus on big picture, some of these goal areas. We're not going to have a chance to go into these incredibly in depth, but happy to answer any questions. But I do just want to really focus on what we're trying to cover in these 4 goal areas. So we're starting with business environment, target markets, so those areas that the city is best suited to capture, which types of industries and businesses, and then the entrepreneurship angle as well. So we're looking at focusing on small to medium-sized businesses, of course large businesses as well, but that small to medium size is really a great focus for the size and scale of the city. Working on, of course, supporting the thriving business climate, attracting businesses in key sectors, and also supporting businesses not just through resources and financing, although of course that is an important role, but also mentorship and really guiding them through the business startup process holistically. So that's goal area 1, really all things around business climate. Second area, we've got strengthening neighborhoods and community connection. So while of course we want economic development to support the ability to create jobs, to create quality jobs, and a mix of industries, we also know that the strength of neighborhoods and communities and people, those are the factors that drive successful businesses. So whether that's connecting different neighborhoods together through physical interventions, with how they travel between neighborhoods, pathways, connectors, things like that, whether that's ensuring that people within neighborhoods are able to access those good jobs as well. So we're really focusing on the people and the community in this goal area. Third one, advancing conditions for growth. So there are quite a few transformative projects, I would say, in the pipeline for the city or that have already started. And to be able to really create the growth that the city desires, to really envision what that growth looks like with the values and the community aspects of the city. That's where the city can really play a role in terms of the development process, the consistency, the timeline, looking at those key properties that have the ability to be transformative. That's what this goal area focuses on, and really solidifying the conditions for how that growth is going to happen. Lastly, improving the downtown experience. So we talked about neighborhoods, and then we've got a particular area focused on downtown as well. Certainly a core of activity for the city, and with the event center coming online, the mix of retail, restaurant, culture, arts, events, all of those elements coming together are really going to help support sort of the connection between those types of activities. So this area really does focus on enhancing and continuing to build on the strengths of downtowns so that other pockets of the city can thrive as well. Again, for the sake of time, we're not going to go through sort of point by point for all of the strategies, but within each of these goal areas, there are between 6 to 13 strategies, I'd say. There's 39 overall. And within each of these areas, we've just pulled out some of the priorities for each of them. So I've already alluded to a few of these, just a few things to point out. So in terms of the business environment, I think we talked a little bit in July about the ability of a business or an entrepreneur at any stage to be able to essentially be able to go into any partner's door and be able to be directed to the appropriate resources. Every partner in the ecosystem is not expected to provide everything for every type of entrepreneur, every type of business, but they are expected to be able to sort of shepherd that business to the appropriate resource. So really making sure that that ecosystem is well known to all of the partners involved is really key to navigation. Shoring up the city's competitive positioning and market positioning, so that really speaks towards highlighting those assets that are going to be most important for the sectors that are well suited for the city, whether that's business mix, workforce, community assets, any number of things, but really making sure that that message is clear in terms of potential business attraction, but also the ability to grow from within as well. Jumping down to neighborhoods and community connections, one of the things we talked a lot about throughout this process was certainly the role of the city with the neighborhood associations and making sure that that is really a two-way street, and there are clear roles for both of those entities, and so making sure that that is continued to grow and evolve, and then also really making sure that neighborhoods are able to successfully benefit from some of the transformative projects that we have talked about, and many of these items are already in the works, but it all really goes back to that vision that was on this first slide here. Markets are going to change, leaders are going to change. This is a 5-year plan, things come up, but ultimately it all has to go back to this vision at the end of the day in terms of what we're doing. All right, jumping to growth here. Some of the things that I had already mentioned in terms of the development process, I know there's already quite a few things in the works there, and that's already being improved and worked towards, so that is a really good role for the city to play in terms of supporting economic development. Of course, ensuring a safe and welcoming environment for residents and visitors, that's going to play a role in the ability to grow and attract businesses. And lastly, ensuring that economic opportunities are able to be shared across neighborhoods, regardless of location in the city. It's really important to go back to some of the principles from the shared prosperity, Kalamazoo. That was part of really how all of this came together, and so those principles are certainly woven into this work as well. Lastly, improving the downtown experience. Again, looking at that mixture of retail, food, entertainment. That's going to help to create a diversity of activities, keep people spending money locally, keeping them bringing their visitors spending locally. So really important to think about what that looks like now in terms of the pipeline for building those businesses locally now or attracting in. Building mixed-use developments that can offer housing solutions. Housing, of course, is woven throughout this as well, as housing is just as big as an economic development issue as it is a community issue. So lots of integration of housing into this. And yeah, just overall working towards a built environment that is going to be continued to build on the ability to welcome people downtown. I did want to point out there were some questions last time about examples of where other cities have used certain interventions or policies or programs. I did include a couple here, and these are in the report as well, from Syracuse, Burlington, Vermont, and then San Francisco. Some ideas here in terms of what might work in Kalamazoo. Obviously, size, scale, culture of the city, values of the city matter, but I do think these are good examples to look towards in terms of whether it's filling vacant storefronts, supporting first-time entrepreneurs in the food business. Lots of different examples here to look towards. All right, I think this is my last one, and then I'll turn it over to Dan. The way that we set up these strategies, they are essentially laid out in a roadmap for implementation. So if you saw the strategy there, or if you saw the strategy document, you've got your strategies, your goal areas, and then we've laid out the timeline for each of those. So the way that you see here, they're broken down into immediate, short-term, midterm, and long-term. Then you can see there the numbers of each of those strategies beside the appropriate category and timeline. So in that immediate category, that's within the next 6-ish months, I'd say. So there are 5 strategies that if the city and the partners can accomplish within the next 6 months, that's going to help continue to build to the short-term, midterm, and long-term. The core you'll see are in that short to midterm. So really that's, say, 6 months to 4-year time frame. That's where your bulk are. Long-term, certainly lots to work towards there, but fewer strategies in that category. All right, the question on everyone's mind, I imagine, is how does this happen? How do we make this happen? And I'm going to let Dan talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to be back with you. This has been a fantastic process. We've met with so many different people, and we are enthused with this product, excited for the city of Kalamazoo, and believe that this is really going to make a difference. The way this strategy has been laid out is as almost like an operational blueprint, but grounded with a lot of data and some rationale, but also it provides a who's going to do what, when kind of step-by-step process. And so we hope that you will almost use this strategy as a reference document, keep it by your side on your desk or on your nightstand, and refer back to it, because there is a lot that is of value here. In helping to make sure that this plan is easily understood by residents, by institutions, by organizations, we've focused on who the partners are. Alex spoke about which recommendations fall into a short, intermediate, medium, and long, and the number of strategies. We also broke that out by partner. And you'll see here of the 39 recommendations, 11 of them fall into the lap of the city proper, and that is with the capital C. That really drives home the point that the city by itself, as a municipality, as a government, cannot effectuate economic change and prosperity, not by itself, but with
private sector partners, with institutional players, with nonprofits, working all together, it can. And it is the pivotal, really a pivotal player in making sure that they all sing the same tune and stay in the same direction. Where the city is most powerful in terms of these 11 strategies: designing and enacting policies in land use planning, providing technical support, and leading community development initiatives. These are areas that should be very familiar. This is what city government does. And yet, it needs to do so with a culture of yes. Yes, we can get this done. Yes, we will facilitate this process. We can be a problem solver. We can do business development if we understand and respect the perspective of the investor. And all of this, if we do this, we can help ensure long-term prosperity for residents. So those 11 initiatives are strategies that are in the city government bucket, are all designed in that way. The existing ecosystem has by far the most strategies that are going to need to be carried out. So a lot of this is going to be coordination and collaboration, making sure that the nonprofits are doing what needs to be done, whether it be within the educational environment, the workforce development setting, civic and social groups, philanthropists and influencers, those who focus on poverty reduction and housing and community development, entrepreneurship, investment capital. All of these factors have to go into the success of this plan. And so in our strategy, we not only say this is the place that this strategy belongs, but we say here is the first step that can be taken, and by whom or who, which organization or set of partners can take that first step. We do that both for the city, the existing ecosystem, but we also recognize that there is a gap, and the gap is what we call an economic development organization / placemaking organization, an entity that is going to be needed to focus on the big lifts. The big lifts. This entity is going to have to be flexible, collaborative, free of political interference, able to leverage private sector resources, have the credibility and respect of the private sector. We stopped short. We went down the road and then we backed up a little bit. We stopped short of outlining exactly what that might look like, because we believe that too needs to be an iterative process and discussion. So we set forth the process for creating that and saying how it might be done. And by the way, city has gone down this road in a couple different areas. Let's look at some of the existing authorities and their bylaws to see if it might fit the bill. If not, perhaps something new may need to be created, but this is a very serious conversation, and so we put this into a longer-term, a midterm to longer-term goal, and there aren't as many initiatives assigned here, but they are big, and so let's do it right. Let's take the time to put the pieces back together again for an entity that can do that. All right, so there are other players, obviously, in this ecosystem. The report outlines them. There, of course, is the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, and we believe that group needs to continue to do what it's doing to bring parcels back online and in a taxable manner. There's roles for the Economic Development Corporation. Specifically, what we are suggesting is that they help guide and be an advisor to the city staff for the 11 strategies that are assigned to it. The DDA, DEGA, we talked about that, particularly in respect to the EDO PMO. Southwest Southwest Michigan First came into conversation a lot, and we see that there is a role for them as well. Continuing with the marketing, continuing with the business attraction and retention, though we press Southwest Michigan First to do more of that across more industries and to delve deeper into the smaller and mid-size companies as well. The Business Advisory Council is the very first recommendation in the report, and that is something that we believe is needed. The region has a champion for the region. The city similarly needs a champion group that can help provide the muscle that may be needed in some cases for the private sector to participate in helping to execute this strategy. Next, there we go. Next, the report provides performance metrics for each of the 4 goal areas that Alex outlined in the 39 strategies. These are those that after a lot of conversation we felt are the most representative, and they can be collected rather easily. We identify the source, and Camoin stands prepared to help the city coordinate the first round of keeping the data up to date. In terms of fostering the business environment, targeting markets, well, number of jobs. That's the standard for economic development. Let's stay with that, but let's be a little bit more precise and in tune to where Kalamazoo, I believe the sentiment is, and that is that jobs that are paying above living wage. That really, we believe, ought to be the thing that we're tracking here. Number of self-employed firms. Let's see how that churn is and the ability to create new jobs and to keep them. If a region, a city, a place can create more jobs than they lose, they're doing average, because that's just the nature of small business. But if you can create more than you lose and you can sustain that, you are on a path to growth, and a lot of that will come from self-employed firms, so that should be a measure. Active project proposals is a classic economic development one. We mentioned per capita income as well. Let's see that rise over time. Population change, clearly. A lot of talk about poverty and ALICE measures. Let's continue to focus on that so that we know whether we're making real progress where it's needed the most. Number of child care facilities in the city. This is an interesting one that economic development groups around the country are focused on. I'm right now, Camoin is helping a small city with 4.6 square miles, and using this measure, believe it or not, they now have 39 child care facilities in a 4.9 square mile area. They're doing quite well, and love to see some movement in that area. Advancing conditions for growth, number of housing units, definitely. Number of commercial properties added back to the tax rolls, number of infill sites that are developed, and then something that's on a lot of our minds, instances of crime in the city by type. Let's continue to track that, be transparent, and have more and more conversations about what can be done. Improving the downtown experience, the annual visitor spending, new square footage, residential, commercial, and number of events hosted downtown. These are the metrics that can form a dashboard for you all to be able to measure whether this strategy is making a difference. And the city staff is well prepared to be able to put this together. There will be some other leading indicators that the EDC is interested in pursuing for those 11 strategies that are assigned to city staff. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jared, and then Alex and I will be happy to answer any of your questions.
All right. So thanks, Dan, Fran, and Alex on presenting that. Where are we going? Where are we at now? And our Economic Development Division staff, we had a retreat a couple weeks ago, and we're starting to dig into those immediate action items. We're building out a 2025 work plan to understand how we're going to accomplish those, the staff needed, and the priority of those items. Also, we've been working closely with our partners that are outlined in the plan. We've already met with Discover Kalamazoo, Can Do Kalamazoo, and others to talk to them about the strategy. They're very excited. They're happy to have their metrics and what they're looking to do incorporated in this, and just to speak to that larger ecosystem in the city for economic development. We're also seriously looking at the Economic Development Corporation, as one of those authorities, that entity that could be the EDO, PMO piece, and looking at the bylaws and what we're hoping that existing corporation can do for the city. So that's something that is a near-term goal as well. Midterm, March will come around here quick enough, and we're looking to have a couple FFE requests based on this strategy and how to implement that. One of the goal areas is to revisit the facade and white box grant, and how can we make some tweaks to that and bring that back in 2026. We have some budget currently in the EDC for some marketing, looking at business recruitment and retention packets that we'll be putting together for 2025, as well as overall marketing and branding of Kalamazoo as open to business, business friendly, and ready to get things done. Longer term, we kicked off recently Imagine Kalamazoo 2035. Very excited to continue to work with staff on that to make sure that this plan is in alignment with that. We're sharing the data report that came with this, community input that we received with the Imagine Kalamazoo team to make sure that's incorporated. And we're going to be doing yearly reports out to the City Commission. The EDC has been the steering committee. We look forward to having them quarterly report outs to them to keep the staff on the right direction, and then yearly report outs here. And I'm really excited. This is a strong plan, and I think much like Imagine Kalamazoo 2035, it's not going to be a plan that sits on the shelf and collects dust, but something that our Economic Development Division is very excited to implement and grow a stronger economy for City of Kalamazoo for all residents. So thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jared and Dan and Alex. I appreciate it. Questions, commissioners? Yes, Vice Mayor Cooney. Oops. Commissioner Cooney.
This is really good, great. I'm wondering if you've had a chance to look, the Urban Institute, just this past week, put out a dashboard for social mobility for youth. And it's quite elaborate. They spent a year working on a thing, and it's very detailed. And I wonder if we could look at that and see how that could play into this whole thing. Because we're going to talk about economic development, we want to talk about our young people, and especially social mobility. So I just think that would be really good to attract.
All right, I see some heads shaking there. Yes. Yes, Commissioner Prado?
Just had a few items I wanted to ask you a little bit more about. First, just a comment. I thought there was a quote at the beginning of the report, and it says, this is from the International Economic Development Council, and it says, equitable economic development is achieved when every member of the community is able to share in and benefit from economic growth. I mean, that seems pretty transformative over, maybe the way that they would have been quoted 20, 30 years ago. And I was really pleased to see as well when you said, this is no longer just about job numbers and development investment. It has to be broader metrics. And you go on to talk about jobs, but not just jobs, but jobs with a living wage, right? per capita income, those sort of metrics as well. Poverty and ALICE numbers, that's really refreshing to see, because it's kind of pointless if we try to create a vibrant downtown that our residents can't partake in. Let's see. So one of the things I wanted to ask you as well is it talks about advanced conditions for growth in that goal, securing strategic land. Can you speak a little bit more about that? And one of the things that's very unique about Kalamazoo is that we're somewhat landlocked. We only have so much more developable land available. But I just was curious if you can speak a little bit about what you see other communities doing of like size as us.
Okay, I'll go. Great question. So that topic certainly came up in many of our conversations, and I think one of the most illuminating things that we learned throughout this process is that while the city is landlocked, there are many, many parcels, of course with their own challenges, that are available for development in certain levels of site readiness. So when we talk about strategic parcels, whether that's connected to a development that's already happening, or maybe a development is slated down the street, whatever it might be, using the tools that are available to the city, so the Brownfield Authority, working with development partners to truly be strategic in terms of, yes, there might be double-digit numbers of parcels technically available, is with intention and with strategy, looking at those parcels that are connected to those other nodes of activity, and whether it's working, again, through the Brownfield Authority or the development process or philanthropy, whatever it might be, we're really looking at what resources are needed to be able to move those strategic parcels along. So certainly being landlocked provides some certain challenges, but I do think that there's opportunity to really look at some of those underutilized parcels in terms of their development capacity.
Thank you. Another one, it's the goal 3.1. It talks about streamlining the site plan and project review process. And it talks about currently, that some of the feedback you had received, and I think some of us up here have heard from other people as well, is just delays, frustration, and increased costs associated with those delays and holdups. What can you glean from that as well? What do you foresee as being maybe some solutions related to improving that?
Do you want to? The one thing I'll say is that we did hear those themes, and we did hear themes of improvement along the way, even in the 10 months of this process. So that's certainly positive, and there might be some specifics that staff wants to add.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Manager, Attorney, Commission. On that topic, that is being reviewed. Our department's looking to do a presentation to the City Manager's office in the next 30 days to clarify some of the things we're recommending, to get their feedback, so that they're not only astute the steps we're taking to assist with that process being more, let's say, beneficial to the community, but also hopefully being more effective with its communication and impact on development. We do have a number of projects that we know that are on the horizon, and we want to make sure we have streamlined the process to be as most effective as possible, and hopefully very supportive with the initiatives that we're hopefully trying to assist developers to be successful in the city of Kalamazoo.
That's awesome. I like the idea of becoming a community that's like, we've got you every step of the way. We're here with you. We're your friend. We're not the enemy. That's that kind of mentality, and I love to see that. So thanks for the steps towards that as well.
Yes, correct.
Another question I had for you is just if you would be willing to talk a little bit more about the small business anti-displacement toolkit and some of the thought behind that as well.
Yeah, I'll mention that. That's a resource that I've referred back to often in some of our work. Comes out of the education world in terms of partnering with small business and really just understanding that the businesses that are most susceptible to displacement when we talk about, of course, development opportunities coming to cities, small, medium, and large, those businesses that are owned by Black, brown, and people of color tend to be the ones that are most likely to be displaced by some of the transformative development in a neighborhood or city. And so that effort, the small business anti-displacement work, specifically takes an approach of identifying what your issue is in the city, identifying what strategies can be used to respond to that specific issue, and really gives you a step-by-step on how to do that. So whether it's how to work with elected officials, how to work with the business community, how to work with the development that's causing the displacement. So I thought it was a useful tool to just include in terms of being proactive about thinking about whether, certainly down the pipeline with some of the development that's coming online, some of the construction we talked about last time in July, really thinking about, again, in terms of sort of, we got you, we're along with you. Of course, there's going to be challenges, but to really think proactively about what might be able to be considered before displacement does happen.
And then just last question, really quick. I love this part where it says neighborhoods hold the potential to be incubators for homegrown businesses that cater to local needs. And I was just curious in terms of like what you think would be the most impacting type of neighborhood, I guess, homegrown incubation, or like what do you see are some of the most effective things happening around the country?
Yeah, I reread that part today too. I think it's so unique neighborhood by neighborhood, especially as work from home is clearly on the rise and just more of a norm. But in terms, it can all go back to land use and zoning as well, because the ability and flexibility of different types of businesses to expand within the home, anything from food, crafting, very small scale specific production, all those types of industries sort of can start in the kitchen, start in the living room, start in the garage. And that's when, finding the entrepreneurial resources, finding the SBDC, those first steps for that entrepreneur that, really likes making something or doing something, but isn't quite sure how to make the next leap. Making sure that those homegrown businesses, whatever industry might be, are connected to that wider ecosystem. That's where some of those best success stories come from. So the incubation really can be in whatever industry is sort of, the passion of the person in that neighborhood.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Prado. Other questions, commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Cooney.
Mayor, I really liked what Commissioner Prado pointed out about metrics and the ones that you're sticking with. And we talk about living wage jobs. What have you included in here, or you've been thinking about skill development, putting in place skill development that are going to help people move up into those living wage jobs? I know KVCC, the community college here, has been doing a lot of that stuff, and how do we join with them and that kind of a thing?
Okay, all right, I guess I'm up. Yes, certainly a huge part of today's economic development world. I can't remember the exact stat, but more and more employers are specifically hiring on skills-based and certification-based, as opposed to even 2-year or 4-year degrees. It's very skills-based. So between community colleges, between the new training center that's coming online that's going to serve the region, which we talked to a staff member over there, and the programming and what they've got going on, sounds truly globally innovative from what they described and from what we've seen. So yes, the ability to work with existing employers on upskilling their current workers to keep them in the pipeline and moving up, ensuring that entry-level workers are receiving skills, whether it's technical training, digital training, whatever skill they might be doing. The more human, social, quote-unquote soft skills, those are still just as needed and valuable in the workplace. So all of, between the education and workforce partners in particular, those topics certainly came up, and I think are recognized in the plan and are going to continue to be a huge part of success for economic development in Kalamazoo and across the country.
Thanks, Commissioner Cooney. Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Decker.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that presentation. I was excited to read through some of the good stuff that's in there, the great stuff that hopefully we will be implementing. But I want to talk about, within the report it talked about, converting some of our streets again from the one-way into the two-way and making it more accessible on foot, walking, bike, other modes of transportation besides just a vehicle. Can you talk about within your report and what you know with other cities and areas that you've worked with, how does improving the walkability and the connectivity of a downtown that disperses out into neighborhoods, how does that affect economic growth within the surrounding areas?
You're right. It's walkability is something that is an idea in good currency. It sells because it works. A lot of communities are looking at what they did in the 70s and the 80s, even the 60s, and saying we were a little too friendly to the vehicles. And certainly that was the case in the heart of vehicle land, Michigan. But what we've seen now is this focus on placemaking and amenity-rich communities where people want to slow down a little bit, walk, enjoy. It does generate more activity, particularly for the local businesses in the downtown areas and for the smaller neighborhood centers as well. The two-way conversion, or going from the one-way to the two-way, does help with that. The studies have shown, and ULI has some great reports on this as well, because it slows it down a bit. And you even see communities doing a lot more with roundabouts and even speed humps, but different ways to just slow it down a little bit, and diverting traffic if that's possible. But this question about Kalamazoo and its street patterns, that was probably the very first thing we heard from stakeholders, because they were excited that this was actually is underway and going to take place. So that is a nod to what we heard. It wasn't necessarily the first thing that we thought we would, have to focus on. We were pleased that that was happening and that there was a lot of well-reasoned, I think, conversation that had gone on before we arrived. And we'd just like to see that continue.
Thank you. Because I think about all of the development that we're doing and how it's trickling out into some of our core neighborhoods and all throughout the city. And again, with an economic development plan, you guys really thought about, okay, if we make this more walkable, which we've all been talking about here, but I think it's just more reiterating the fact is that we're going to spend more local dollars, neighborhood dollars within the area. And if you can make some place that's walkable, that's got a grocery store, a daycare, hair salon, everything within walkability range, then I think we will have a much happier, ecosystem in the downtown area.
I agree.
I have one thing on the walkability. I think a piece of the next step for that I think about is wayfinding and signage and things, because it is sort of going to be a new environment and an expectation. And, when you're a pedestrian in a downtown or any sort of space that you shop in, you just sort of subconsciously follow, where you're told to go. And so these are going to be new patterns and sort of, not that the street's going to be completely new, but just sort of showing the pedestrian and the consumer that, there's businesses this way and there's businesses that way and half a mile down. Or I've seen Sometimes wayfinding will do walking distance, so 5 minutes, 10 minutes, so people know how accessible it is. It's really just showing the consumer and resident what's within their walking distance, just because it is going to be a little bit new as that transition happens.
Thank you. I definitely agree with that. I did some walking around downtown a couple weeks ago with a girlfriend, and I'm showing her all the ins and outs. Oh, you can go back this way and get here. And, they didn't know these things. So I think you're right, especially with some of the signage, too, that can bring more light to, if you go around this corner, you're going to end up here. I definitely do like that. And I really think that, this for me is a development continuum as we start to, move our city forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Decker. Other questions? Yeah, Vice Mayor Hess.
Just really quickly, thank you for the presentation. I had the same question as Commissioner Decker, because I think that the two-way is going to be transformational. But how long are we going to engage you as help for the city and working with the city? How long is that going to happen? Are you just going to give us a plan and walk away?
You're the project manager. Our scope of service was to deliver this report, and we've done so. But with every report that Des Moines does, we think we distinguish ourselves by leaving the door open and saying, please, for instance, on those metrics, if you have a question on how to do that, call us. The meter's not running on that, but we've fulfilled all elements of the scope of services. We would be more than happy to help if it were needed with advising on implementation and designing, a contract that could serve that purpose. But we've fulfilled it, and we're almost sad to not be in a position to be able to come back, because we've had a lot of fun.
Well, we're grateful for your work, and we're glad that you enjoyed Kalamazoo, and we want you to come back as visitors, if nothing else. Thank you.
All set on the questions? Okay, thank you so much. I have a few things to follow up on, so I appreciate you being around and being ready for all this. In different categories. One thing I think when you're thinking about economic development and where you live, one thing that crosses your mind is, what's your leverage? What's your advantage? What's your edge? And I think some places it's obvious. You might be on the edge of a beautiful lake, and people like to come there because it's a tourism location, or you're right on the edge of the mountains, that sort of thing. And then as you move away from those very obvious kind of geographic, weather, really important features that people like to visit, and you become more into the, I guess this space that is, in some ways you could be a town like another town that's just down the road. How do you think about that leverage piece? And I know it's not just that, but how do you think about that leverage piece for yourself that you're trying to build on? What is it that you have? What's here? What's part of your team? So you're not just inventing the wheel, or, for example, this idea of supporting, kind of small entrepreneurship or home-based businesses seems to be a rather universal kind of a suggestion across the board, and maybe this is too long of an answer for now, but how do you identify what are your own strengths to leverage those things? Seems really important to me when it comes to economic development and the place-based kind of a strategy.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It absolutely is important. First thing when you started talking, Mr. Mayor, I asked that question of a waitress here. She had a lot of life, a lot of character, and I said, "What brought you to Kalamazoo?" She said, "Well, that's an interesting question. I was living in Chicago, and I didn't want to be in a big city. I wanted to be in a city that was more personal, and I could feel like I belonged." I said, so that's why you chose Kalamazoo? And she said, well, actually, I just like the name. It was fun to say. And she was serious. But I think it's that first point that the quality of life, the place, the special nature, it can be found in a community of this size. And I think a lot of young professionals are looking for that. And in an age where we can now almost choose to live and be some distance from our work, I think that's more important. We're seeing a lot of that around the country where they can market themselves as having a unique character. Now, Kalamazoo goes beyond that, and they have the industry. They have different levels of jobs that can be offered, along with the high quality of life. And I think that is Kalamazoo's edge, particularly in this part of Michigan. But I think that can be marketed much more broadly as well. The progressive nature, which you could interpret as, I'm able to find myself here, I'm able to be creative, to express myself, but also to make a living, to connect with the jobs of the future, and there are plenty of them, be they in the pharmaceutical, the technical, the medical, the health, the gig economy, and so forth. Kalamazoo has it. What it must do, we believe, is to focus on those things in each one of these four categories that you see on the screen that speak to improving what you have and building from within. You don't see in this strategy silver bullets. Oh, if only we could build this, if only we had this industry. Economic development of today is much more organic. And we believe that the soil here is it's very good for building out this kind of a strategy and seeing some progress.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Just to follow up on that and really connected to some extent to what Commissioner Cooney had to say, because we talk about homegrown businesses and that sort of thing, which is great, taking advantage of people's creativity. A lot of people who are starting their own businesses do not themselves make living wages when they're getting started. I mean, a lot of times, at least the first part, or maybe even the second part of creating your own business is just find a way just to make it by yourself, and hopefully you can pay yourself, which gets to the point of, it does seem like there is an opportunity here for good jobs and people getting better jobs than they currently have in order to get into this living wage kind of a space. So that does seem like a real possible pipeline. It's just literally helping people who live here be able to take advantage of those job opportunities they're going to, and they could still do their side business, but to really change their lives in that way. Any comments on that in terms of kind of job development, individual development relative to the idea of startups and entrepreneurship? And focus, how does the city play a role in that sort of thing?
No wrong door.
Well, so two things on that. With the sort of increase in the pipeline of just good paying, high quality jobs, I think that also goes back to the skill development thing too, because as you are adding skills, that is helping to build, ideally, your wages as well, right? And if we can keep those local and keep building local jobs, so that's important to keep building on that. In terms of entrepreneurship, homegrown businesses, turning those into job creation opportunities. Of course, we want that single entrepreneur to, live out their dream and their passion, but to be able to help the ones that are likely to grow, to be able to find the resources that are necessary to be able to grow. So to build on Dan's metaphor, the soil, the seeds, right, that existing ecosystem that we talked about, Can Do Kalamazoo, all the other incubators, accelerators, those entrepreneurship support systems are going to help with that job creation ability and to help that single entrepreneur create a business that employs 3 to 4 people that can, maybe not at the start, but eventually pay a decent wage. And to be able to have that churn and many of those types of activities happening, right, continues to drive up wages and support overall community prosperity. We're not just looking for a job, we're looking for jobs that are able to contribute to community prosperity.
And I would add to that you want to make sure that people aren't frustrated in thinking or not knowing how to be able to find those opportunities to improve their skills or to start a business. And we emphasize this in the report, that there should be no wrong door and that there needs to be tighter coordination amongst those groups that are helping small businesses to make sure that it is seen as one system, no one wrong door, and that they're collaborating, they're getting together, they're sharing information and experiences. But if I'm going to go onto one organization's website, I ought to be able to understand that that's not the only place. There are many partners that can support me because perhaps this organization doesn't quite approach it the way I'm looking for or I need. They may not have quite what I need. Within this ecosystem, it's got to be clear that you can find it and you can do so seamlessly and easily.
Appreciate that. One thing that I'm not necessarily seeing that was highlighted as it relates to the role of city government, which seems foundationally important to me, is items related to things like this. How does the city look? Does the city look like it's a place that cares about itself? And that ties back to all kinds of things that the city does related to litter and trash, mowing of abandoned properties. This is something I've been talking to the city manager's office about a lot. Blighted properties dotted throughout neighborhoods that are there for a long, long time. Infrastructure, streets, paving, sidewalks, all that sort of business. So is that something you focused on as far as an important areas for the city? When it's city government, best suited for, I don't see that highlighted necessarily in this summary report.
Yes, it might not be quite called out in some of these slides, but in advanced conditions for growth, there are quite a few mentions of all of those aspects that you just talked about: infrastructure, roads, sidewalks, the ability to, it goes back to making sure that those are walkable and people want to, be downtown if that's where it's focused. The other item that we did add in after our last meeting that comes to mind when you mentioned all of those items, I think Commissioner Wilson, you mentioned last time the connection to green infrastructure. If we're going through construction and knowing that things are going to be torn up, is there an ability to think about how we rebuild some of our infrastructure in a way that is going to be climate resilient? So that did get incorporated. So there's certainly sprinkled throughout areas that, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's parking, streets, trees, all the things that make the physical environment welcoming, safe, certainly something that is a necessary foundational element for any economic development.
And if I may be so bold, the impression that one has coming into Kalamazoo, perhaps for the first time, we heard that it is a feeling that, is this a safe place for me? Maybe not. And so if there were one thing here that really should grab our attention, it should be, what can we do to improve public safety, or at least the perception of public safety, that this is a welcoming environment. This report was was not meant to be an overall assessment of the infrastructure, but the look and the feel, that gets back to what I was saying about the specialness of people and this welcoming environment. I think public safety plays a big role in that, a perception of crime.
Appreciate it. Something that I am not totally familiar with, and this is something you recommend, which is not only kind of doing some of the things you're already doing, but this idea of an economic development organization. I don't know if there's a difference between that and a place management organization or not, but what does that look like if you're creating an entity that does that? What specifically is happening there?
Yeah, you're asking me to do your job for you now because I'm just kidding. In the report, we suggest that you would be an excellent person to help with the economic development, the business committee, to form it so that they can begin focusing on that kind of an issue. We were very careful not to say an EDO or an authority or a placemaking organization, because each brings with it a connotation. We heard that quite clearly when we said, what about a redevelopment authority? What about, well, we've got plenty of those and they just didn't work. What about a placemaking organization? Well, what do you mean by that? What about an EDO? Well, are you talking about Southwest Michigan First? What we believe this is probably going to end up being is a combination of all of the above. An organization that is focused on economic development and economic opportunities, i.e. an EDO, but not in a traditional source of we're out here to market, we're out here to attract, not the Southwest Michigan variety. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an EDO that has an economic infused mission. A placemaking organization that is focused on those very things, Mayor, that you were just talking about, the look and the condition of the community, and maybe even having powers to be able to effectuate change, transformative projects. Maybe that's development. Maybe it's the ability to acquire and develop real estate, or even to manage that real estate. That should be something that goes through a due diligence process. We asked some questions in the report that we think the committee should answer. And that is, what's worked in the past, what hasn't, what do we need? It's going to be a combination of all of the above, and I think Kalamazoo has a unique opportunity to create an organization that is unique to Kalamazoo. I think that's what's needed. Don't turn to the best practice of somewhere else and say, well, in Grand Rapids, this is what they have. I guess that's what we need. No, that's never the answer. It's really, what have we done that has worked for us and that hasn't worked for us? And maybe we need to have a composite kind of an organization. So we're leading you in that direction. And right now we're just saying EDO/PMO. And we made up the PMO because we haven't been using that. But it's not quite an authority, but it may have some powers if needed to be able to get things done.
That's helpful. Thank you. Any other questions that have come up during our conversation? All right. Thank you once again. I appreciate all your efforts. And Director Mitchell, Jared, thank you so much for participating in this. Manager Ritzman, anything else for the presentation?
Nope, we'll jump to our next item, and that's the presentation of the draft 2025 Foundation for Excellence budget and grants. And Steve Brown, the FFE manager, is going to be providing that presentation. Steve?
Welcome, Mr. Brown.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager Ritzma. I'm Steve Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Foundation for Excellence, and I'm here this evening to follow up on a presentation from earlier this year where we outlaid the grant draft allotment from the Foundation for Excellence Board. So what I want to do is recap what the FFE is for community members watching in the audience or at home. And the graphic on screen really lays things out, this whole system of how the FFE works with the city. So it starts with community input, and that's through the Imagine Kalamazoo process. That could be through plans such as what we heard this evening as well, which all fold in to give the city really the vision, the particular objectives, and the projects that can be part of our transformed future. Meanwhile, the FFE builds its endowment, and then that generates earnings each year that can be granted to the city in 3 areas, which I'll cover this evening, so that those revenues match with that vision and help to bring Kalamazoo forward really for its residents and stakeholders in the future that we're all hoping for ourselves and our families. The 3 areas that FFE invests in are, in order, we lower the city taxes by 38%. So that means that we backfill the city so that it can pass on those savings to any city taxpayer, whether it's individual, business, commercial. And that's a really significant savings that we like to highlight, because the intention there is that it retains people, families, businesses, and it also attracts people, families, businesses that want to become part of our community. Meanwhile, we are strengthening the city's budget with millions of dollars each year so that as a municipal entity, it can undertake the new requirements for innovative thinking, for increased service where needed, and really bring that Imagine Kalamazoo vision to life. And then up top here, you'll see the aspirational projects, and those are some of the more innovative things we see. Really, anything that would have been covered in the economic development plan tonight would fall in that category of projects and programs, partnerships with local community development organizations, where we're doing work that may not always have been typical for the city of Kalamazoo, that can help drive us forward together. The background of this, which is worth a quick update, is that our goal is to raise a $500 million endowment, and we plan on doing that based on the current financials by 2030 or 2031. We're right on target. Currently, we've raised about $284 million of invested assets, and those are spinning off the grants that you'll see this evening that we're able to pay in these areas. So in order, we have the tax reduction payment. I tried to keep these slides very simple so that the information is very user-friendly for people viewing at home or in the audience as well as yourselves. And you'll see this year, we're looking at $15.93 million paid to the city to pass that savings on to, again, like I said, individuals, businesses, industry, you name it, anybody who's paying city property taxes. And that is a 3.8% increase on last year. This, it's important to state, grows or shrinks depending on whether or not the taxable value of the collective real estate value in the city grows or shrinks. It's great that it's growing, because that means we have increased investment. It means we have increased value. It means that those assets are appreciating to the benefit of their owners and also the businesses that need them to succeed. And homeowner value, it's, as we know, the largest significant investment that most Americans have if they have investments. So we've seen this growing, and we would hope to see it continue to grow at a reasonable rate for the foreseeable future. But again, that's really based on the larger economic conditions that we're all subject to. The budget stabilization grant is calculated by a standard factor, which comes from a Michigan formula, state of Michigan formula, and that's based ultimately on a market basket of goods as well as some other factors. And so this year it's about 3%. It's calculated here as 2.95% increase. So that'll be $4.88 million to the city's general fund budget. And the aspirational grant, which was presented earlier this spring, again, as awareness, so that as the city goes through its special request and budgeting process, it is aware of the resources that are going to be available for it to match with projects and programs. You'll notice the asterisk on 2024. So that was when we reduced, so this current fiscal year, that's when we really reduced the FFE resources, A, to preserve capital after the large economic hit that we had during COVID, and also in context to the very significant ARPA federal dollars that were infused with the city over the past several years and going on into the future few years. So the not to exceed grant value for the aspirational in 2025 will be $5 million. And this, again, I made it as big as I could for viewers and readers, but this will be, of course, discussed again in the future as well. This is a table of the projects that the city, through its special request process, proposes to the FFE. This is a very promising list that has made it through committee at the Foundation for Excellence Board, and we intend to take to the board for approval on October 28th. These are returning projects, so items that we've funded in the past. You'll see $1.7 million for housing. So just to give you a baseline, of the $5 million, that's about 34%. $1.36 million for infrastructure, so that's sidewalks, that's traffic calming, pedestrian improvements. And then those are sort of large categories. The youth below that, if you aggregate them all together, it's about 20% of the budget. And those are familiar projects such as the My City collaboration with KRISA, as well as the Super Rec program, All Things Possible, and then a few smaller programs that support those, such as counselors in training. There's 4 new projects this year, and those are ranked by value, by cost. So critical code repair is top there, you can see, and that's aligned with the safe community goal for Imagine Kalamazoo. And then the home share program pilot, capacity building for small business support, and event support, which is essentially reimbursing the city so that it can open up its parks and facilities for nonprofits to have community organization events that help the community. Finally, there's the project administration. So this is just the calculation of what it costs the city to undertake this work based on a cost allocation that it has in its management services department. And that totals us out to about $5 million. Excuse me, to exactly $5 million. So the total grants for 2025, there's a small asterisk on this, and I'll explain why. So we have the $15.93 million for tax reduction, $4.88 for budget stabilization, and $5 million for aspirational. There's $86,660, if you're interested in knowing, of true-up money from last year's tax reduction. That's because at this time every year, these are always estimates, and they're extremely precise estimates, as you can tell by the small amount of true-up we need each year. But this time next year, we'll have to do the same thing for this tax estimate, and that just keeps us whole on the back end of each grant cycle. Now, with 2025, we pass, I say this every time, but it's getting really fun to say, a new milestone. This one's $220 million. So this is the first time we've crossed $200 million of investment in the city of Kalamazoo through this project we call the Foundation for Excellence. And that's since 2017. And because we're going to be able to achieve our $500 million endowment, which is the original goal, and it's the one we're sticking to, that means that we're able to look forward. And again, these are projected numbers, these are estimates. But in our projections out over the next 15 years, that means that we'll be able to do this every year, and that'll be $483 million estimated invested in the city of Kalamazoo. And you can see it broken down there as tax reduction, city stabilization, and aspirational grants. Now, in a sense, this is the biggest story that we could tell, but it's also important to emphasize that we're part of a big philanthropic landscape in the city of projects, foundations, donations from private citizens, investments from businesses. So we love seeing this as kind of us helping and pulling our weight along forward on all of these plans: economic development, youth development, investment in affordable housing, improving the infrastructure. And I think of this personally, and I've discovered a way to kind of talk about it as trend work. In any one year, we're not going to really solve a housing crisis, but look what we've done in 8 years. The last presentation we had, I think, included 1,300 new units, and that was from zero. We started, no new housing was built by the city, 1,300 units in 7 or 8 years, and we're just going to keep moving forward with these pieces incrementally. And I think it's that slow and steady approach on this large scale which really helps drive this transformative work we call Imagine Kalamazoo and we call the Foundation for Excellence forward. And finally, it's just something I always like to reinforce. These are big numbers, but ultimately the need and the demand is big, and there's always a call for more. But we work hard with just the simple mathematics, as well as with the investments and the committees and the board itself, to make as many resources available as possible. And yourselves as commissioners, viewers, the public can be very confident that we're doing that and that we revisit it every year to make sure that that's the case. So finally, and this is actually just kind of a snapshot of a much, much longer budgeting process, but October 7th is today. We're presenting this to update you, and we'll take this back to the board for approval on October 28th, and then this will be incorporated, of course, in your budget process for presentations in November, December, and then the final approval in early January. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that commissioners you may have. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for being here with us, Director Brown. I appreciate that. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Pradel.
Steve, thanks for being here. Was wondering if you could just remind the public if they're curious about how those big dollars have been spent throughout the city and on different projects or by neighborhood. Can you remind everybody how they can learn more about where the impacts happen? And then maybe along those lines, share some ways that we have continued and will continue to communicate that impact as well to the public.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Commissioner Pradel. So kzuffe.org, or the simple way is just Google Foundation for Excellence will be your top choices there on Google or your favorite search engine. You'll get to our website. We link to the city's website, which has stories on it. It also links to our investment map, which shows where on a project by project and really dollar for dollar level over the last 7 years we've invested dollars in aspirational funding, as well as where the tax benefits are accruing to the properties within the city. We have further plans to just continue analyzing this information because it's, we think, very enlightening about the scope and scale of this project and where it's having the impact on whom, why, when, etc. We also produce an annual newsletter, and this year's newsletter is currently still in the kitchen. We're getting it ready, and we plan on releasing it, as we have in previous years, on January 1st, which would be really in cadence with the city's City View newsletter, which has been sent out over the last, I believe, year and a half. I'm always available for presentations, love to be in the community to share for any community groups that anyone has, neighborhood organizations, you name it. I'm there to do a deep dive into programs. You can imagine that after 8 years of programming, we have, as I pointed out, $220 million worth of investments to cover, and those can be in areas of youth development, infrastructure, you name it. Happy to dive deep in those. Over the years, our largest investments have been in youth development, in infrastructure, in economic development, and in affordable housing. Supporting all that would be another large area of investment, which is outreach and engagement, and really a broad category of supports to community planning and economic development, which allows Imagine Kalamazoo to take place. And that's a range of activities. It's almost too broad to cover just off even the top of my head, but it's, again, all supporting that first process chart we showed of where that transformative vision comes around to meet that transformative generosity.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Hess.
Sure. Just a comment. Steve, I just have to say a thank you for your leadership of this very unique foundation over the past 8 years. And I just love that we've normalized excellence here in the city of Kalamazoo. It's like, oh yeah, we have the Foundation for Excellence. Oh yes, we have the Promise. Oh yes, we have. I don't want us to become numb to that. I want us to be able to shout it from the housetops, which is what you're doing with your newsletter and coming out this way. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how we all might give back. I know there's an opportunity to do so when we receive our tax bills. Could you go over that a bit?
There is, Commissioner Hess. Thank you very much, and thank you for your service on the FFE board previously as well. The easiest opportunity for anyone is to, again, jump on our website, and there's a Donate Now button where anybody can give any amount that they'd like. And then also there's a link as well to just contact me directly for structured gifts, things we think about in terms of bequests or estates. When people are doing financial planning for their estate, it's a fantastic opportunity to work with us and see how, a lifetime's work could really help contribute to the city for our lifetime's work of making this a better place. So the website's a great portal, and that website also has just a quick link to email. People can always reach out to me also by phone. So, yeah.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate your professionalism, and it's a wonderful gift to the city, no question about it. I was out there in the beginning when we advocated for this, as was the mayor, and my understanding was in the beginning that there were 3 goals. One was to balance the budget, second was to reduce taxes, and the third was the aspirational projects. And at the very top, it was real clear, at the very top was the reduction of intergenerational poverty. Excuse me. So I just hope we keep that at the top of the aspirational projects.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Other questions or comments for Director Brown? All set, Commissioners. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your efforts. Thank you for coming here and spending some time with us this evening. Anything else for us, Manager Ritzma?
That completes our work session.
All right, appreciate that very much. Commissioners, now is an opportunity for commissioner comments. Just a reminder here that at our business meeting, there is also an opportunity for commissioner comments, and that's at the end of our business meeting. Our business meeting does start here in approximately half an hour at 7 o'clock, and hoping all of you who may have participated in this one will be sharing that time with us. Don't have to be here in the chambers to see what's going on. Multiple opportunities to watch this meeting. So seeing no commissioner comments, that wasn't that nice.
Didn't know if there were more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Prado. Wow, okay. I get to serve with some very nice people. Wow. I didn't even think it. I was just going to let him suffer there in silence. So.
I offered him my water.
Okay, I'm sorry. I missed that. Everybody jumped up but me. So, all right, seeing no commissioner comments, then we are adjourned.